Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. I welcome you to the 13th lecture on the course Management, Organizational Policies and Practices. Before we start with the contents of the 13th lecture, let me give you a recap of lecture 12, which was on employee involvement programs, and wherein we discussed the importance of the participation of the employees in the decision making of the organization, what impacts this participation by the employees has on the managerial decision making and on empowering the employees, or how it is a motivation or the incentives for the employees to be a part of the team of the by the employer, right? So we discussed that the different there can be different initiatives by the organization to get the employees involved in the whole process. So the first one was the participative management that we discussed, wherein we saw that how the participative management wherein the employer involves the employees in the decision making or in the problem solving or other important issues or discussions in the organization, how the what is the relevance of that decision making, or what is the relevance of that style of participation from the employees, wherein what happens is that the employees they have their say in the decision making and what consequences or implications it has for the management in terms of some employees. They may not be that experts, and they may not be very good source of decision making, or they may not be very good source of information. They may not be experts, or they may not have complete information about the problem, and they may not be able to give expert opinion. And then the different options given by those employees that might lead not to a very good decision by the managers, because the managers might get biased or something, right? So the managers, they need to make sure that the problems in which they are introducing the employees, or in which they are taking the representation of the employees are that the problems relate to those employees. And secondly, the managers should also make sure that the employees, they have the proper say, they have the proper knowledge about the problem. So if they don't have adequate knowledge about the problem, then it can be a problem to get the employees involved in the decisions. Then the representative participation is another way to get the employee involvement. So in representative participation, we discussed that there are two types. One was when the employees through unions, they are the union representatives, and the unions are formed, and through those unions, employees say is communicated to the top management. And there are in certain organizations the unions are formed, and the unions are very strong representatives of the employees. When the size of the organization is beyond a minimum level, right, or beyond about 50 or more, when there are employees, then the employees, they have the right to form the union. The unions can be formed in organizations where the size of the employees is greater than 50, or the organization size is greater than 50 employees, right? So in that case, they can form the unions, and the employees basically form the unions to get themselves protected for their own security, right, and for their own for the protection of their own rights, and to make sure that the decisions that are taking place in the organization, they're not at the stake of the employees, and they're not only in the favor of the shareholders, but the stakeholder perspective is also kept in view, and the employee rights and their aspirations, they are also considered while making the decisions, right? So they have their union representative, and that union representative has meetings before making of the decisions relating to all the different issues, such as the contracts of the employees, their revisions, their salaries, their promotions, and a lot of other decisions. There's job securities, that termination of the contracts, etc. All the decisions they are discussed between the top management and the labor representative before arriving at a final decision, right? So that is how the employees are represented, and then they are also represented at the board of in the board meetings, right? But there are certain criticisms on this style of management as well, which we discussed, that how it has been stated that these employee representatives, they only represent their own self-interests and they only try to protect their self-interests, but they do not represent the interests of the employees at large at the shop floor, right? So that was a criticism on this. And then we discussed the quality circles, that how in these quality circles, a group of 10 to 12 or 15 employees, they are who are concerning the similar problems, or who have the similar tasks, they get together along with their supervisor, they share the different problems, they share how those problems they can be addressed, and so on, and then they arrive at they give certain suggestions on what can be done to solve the problems, what are the different options, etc., and then they come up with the solutions. And but the employees who are part of these quality circles, they don't have a final say, or they don't have a final authority on the decision, but they can just make their recommendations. Therefore, the quality circles, that has also been criticized because it is stated that its effectiveness is, although the decisions of the quality circles, or although they are reported to bring some improvement in the quality of the decisions and in an attempt to empower the employees, but still they have been criticized, stating that it's just a bandwagon by the management to show that they are really involving employees, but actually employee involvement by this way is minimal, because they have just an hour meeting or so in a week out of the 40 hours, 35 or 40 hours of work a week, right? So this is how they are being criticized. Then we discussed that how these employee involvement programs, they are linked to the different motivation theories, and therein we discussed that how we discussed a number of the relevance of these employee involvement programs to the motivation theories, such as the Herzberg's theory, Herzberg's theory of the hygiene factors and the motivators. In there, we discussed that how there are certain factors, that only the hygiene factors that prevent the employees from getting job dissatisfaction, and there are certain job satisfiers, and those satisfiers, they are basically how to empower the employees, how to involve them in the decision-making programs of the organization, and by their involvement, by the autonomy and by the empowerment to the employees, they can be the long-term satisfaction of the employees that can be achieved. So they are the motivating factors, right? Then we also had a discussion on the job characteristics theory, that also emphasizes on empowering the employees, that how empowering the employees that can lead to this long-term satisfaction and the long-term results and the long-term motivations of the employees in the form of commitment and satisfaction and the reduced turnover, and so on, right? And then we discussed that how these rewards, they can be linked to the motivation of the employees, and we discussed that rewards, they are basically of two kinds: the extrinsic rewards, which are in the form of the money, in the form of promotions, and in the form of other number of extrinsic factors. And we also have the intrinsic rewards that can also be used to motivate the employees. And these intrinsic rewards can only be merely a recognition from your employer or from your supervisor. They can just be a recognition, a thank you note from your supervisor, right, acknowledging your efforts and acknowledging your output. That sometimes that can even be more than enough for you, or recognizing your efforts in front of a larger group of people, or in the front of the significant others, right? That may make you give you a sense of accomplishment and a sense of achievement and a sense of recognition. So there are also the intrinsic awards that can sometimes motivate the employees. And we discussed that these two different forms of awards, such as the extrinsic or the intrinsic rewards, they can have their influences on the motivation of the employees. And the managers, they need to understand that what are the motivational orientations of the employees. Some employees, they are more satisfied with the extrinsic rewards, and some employees, they require, or their need is the intrinsic rewards, so they are more satisfied with the intrinsic rewards. So it depends upon what are the motivational orientations, and the managers, they need to understand the different requirements of the different individuals and customize their policies and practices and the intentions and the reward structure according to the requirements and the needs of the employees. Then we discussed that how the organization, it needs to establish its pay structure, or how it establishes its pay structure, and what it has to pay. So in order to decide what it has to pay, we discussed that there is both an internal criteria and we discussed an external criteria. As per the internal criteria, we discussed that the manager or the organization or the employer needs to see that what is the job description, what are the particular characteristics, or what the potential employee is going to perform, right? And vis-a-vis that, those job characteristics, what is the value that the potential employee is going to provide to the organization, we judge the potential employee on the basis of the value added that he can provide to the organization, and the potential contributions of the employee to the organization or his worth to the organization, and then on the basis of that it makes its analysis and then it decides what to pay. But we also discussed that that is not the only way of deciding what you have to pay to the employee, but you also need to conduct an external environmental analysis in which you see the salaries of the competitors that are being offered on the similar position, right? So the salary of the competitor is really important, and that what the salaries or what package the competitor is providing, because if you are not providing as much and the potential employee is really worth it and you are not offering him as much as the competitor is offering, then he might be poached by the competitor even before he joins you, or after joining he may be poached by the competitor, because that might be a bigger incentive for the potential employee, especially when he is really capable and he is really skillful. So it really depends upon what kind of skills the job requires, what kind of skills the potential person has, what is the availability in the labor market of the person. Is the labor market very loose or it is very tight, right? So depending upon and how critical, how important that task is for you as an employer, right? So if there is like during the 1990s, there was really a huge demand for this IT people, the technical people, and their supply was in dearth, so they were paid really high. And same goes for this healthcare sector, the doctors and the other healthcare professionals. They have always been in their demand in shortages, and their demand has always been higher, so they have been paid higher, right? So similarly, the IT people, as I gave you the example, so it depends, really depends, your pay structure depends upon a number of factors, but the most important of those are that your internal structure, what are your job characteristics, what are your requirements, how much the potential worker is going to add value to what you require, right? And then the external market, how the external market is, how the labor market is. So they are the really important and most critical factors in determining that what you have to pay. Then we had a discussion on how you have to pay. You have to reward the individual employees through the variable pay programs, right? And that is an option and this option has been increasingly utilized by the employers nowadays, because of the flexibility pressures that they have, that how they have to keep their costs low in face of the recession in the global economy, and in the face of the reduced demand for their products, how they can keep their costs low and how they can stay more and more flexible. So relating to that, there are a number of options that are available for the employers that we discussed in great detail, that how the employer chooses between those different options. And we started off our discussion from this piece rate pay, where we saw that how it is the basic, there is no basic pay herein, and it's only related to what your output is and you are getting per unit rate, right? So if you are producing 10 bricks, you will be getting the $10 for those 10 bricks, and if you are producing 20 bricks, you will be getting $20 for those 20 bricks, right? But and we also discussed that this kind of pay rate schemes, they cannot be offered at all levels of jobs, but in certain jobs they can be offered, and in certain jobs you cannot link them to without any basic pay. You cannot just pay them. right? And then we discuss this merit-based pay, wherein you make your you pay the employees on the basis of their performance, right, which is the pay for performance as well. And we discussed that how it is really important to have a good performance evaluation measure, to have a good performance evaluation tool, that which it should to have a really fair and transparent system and a more objective kind of system in order for this type of pay schemes to work, right? Because otherwise this kind of pay schemes, they are prone to failure, because they can really have, if the performance pay evaluation system is really subjective, then it can really increase the perceptions of unfairness in the eyes of the employees who are not receiving any favorable pay raises, right? And they might perceive that there is some injustice being carried on. Either the performance evaluation system is not fair, or the procedure is not fair, or the measures are not valid, or the supervisors are not unbiased, right? So there can be a number of reasons that the employees who perceive that they are being treated unfairly, they can attribute this unfairness to a number of reasons, right? So this for this system to work, we discussed that it should be really effective, it should be valid, it should be transparent, right? And it should be more objective. The more subjective the system is, the more prone it is to this kind of unfair perceptions. Then we discussed that the bonuses, that can also be a form of the variable pay systems, that you give them the employees the bonuses depending upon your performance. And then we also discussed this skill-based pay, wherein the organizations, they ask the employees to learn a number of different skills, and as soon as they keep on upgrading the skills, they are given these rewards, and they are given these salary increases or increments or whatever. So they link their pay systems to this skill-based. And we discussed the disadvantages of the system as well, wherein if you are wherein we discussed that if you are really linking the pays to the skills, and the more and more employees, they're learning those skills, then after the skills are learned, you have to pay them higher, even if you are not utilizing the new skills learned by the employees, right? So that is just a cost for you. Then in this case, it's cost for the employees, and it is cost for the organization, because it is paying the employees for the services which they are not getting, because the employer may not be in need of all those services that are being got by the employees. And then when the employee has learned all the skills, then he gets the income or the salary which is commensurate with the learning of those skills, then after that, what is the motivation source for the employee, right? So there are a number of drawbacks of this kind of system as well, which although it has been used in the countries like Japan, etc., right? And then we have this profit sharing plans, wherein we'll discuss that this kind of plans and the gain sharing plans, they are basically the gain sharing plans, are the group based plans, which we discussed that how therein the outcomes of the groups, they have been linked to the salaries or the promotions or whatever. So it is basically a group based activity, wherein the teamwork is acknowledged and the teamwork is paid for. Then this employee stock ownership plans, wherein the organizations, they give the incentives to the employees by giving them ownership of the stocks at a very low rate, which is very lower than the face value or the market value of the stock of the company. So sometimes this kind of option that has been discussed to be really motivating for the employees, but it also has drawbacks, and some data also reports that it is not a very positive or very good way of rewarding the employees through the variable pay programs, right? So we discussed a number of these variable pay programs and how they influence they can influence the reward structure of the organization, and their positives and negatives. So you should all be familiar with the strengths and the drawbacks of these various programs, and when each of these programs can be offered, you need to put an insight into this area as well, that which program can be offered or why which program is offered, right? So and what are their different consequences for the employee motivation, and what is their contribution or what is their importance for the organization, which program is more suitable for the organization, and under what circumstances, under what conditions. So you need to we have answers also in this discussion, right, for on all the questions that I just posed to you. So you listen to this discussion very carefully and then try to come up to the answer. And these were the different kinds of rewards in the different programs, and how the different motivations of the employees that can be induced. This is what was the discussion of the lecture 12. For lecture 13, we move to the managing of information, right? So this is another interesting lecture as well. Let's have the outline of this lecture, which after going through this lecture, you should be able to explain the strategic importance of information. You should be able to describe the characteristics of useful information, that is its value and costs, and you should be able to explain the basics of capturing, the processing and protecting information. You should also be able to describe how companies can share and access information and knowledge. So so the chapter or the discussion is all going to be about the information, how information can be managed, what are the different challenges to getting, receiving and capturing and storing the information, right? How the information was received and how it was handled earlier and how it is being done now, what are the changes. So then and now, I have a few examples for you. So before, the adding machines were used instead of the spreadsheets that are being used now. Before, the filing system was used instead of storing in the hard drives. Now we store in hard drives. Earlier we used to maintain the files. So even now we have not completely, of course, shifted to the hard drives, right, or to that system which is not at all manual, which is 100% computerized. Many organizations are still maintaining this file system, but to some extent they have the computer systems as well in every organization, whether that is small organization, whether that is remote organization, whether that is really a public organization. You can see this this computer system there as well, right? So we have the software, although it depends upon to what degree you have become digitalized or computerized. That can be different, but the computers are introduced now in every field, in every area and everywhere. Right, and then we have this hard copy summary, which used to be sent by post to head office instead of transferring through satellite. Now the fact sheets, the data sheets, any kind of letters, any kind of notifications, you're sitting in your Islamabad office. There are a number of branches in all the different areas, and you have the head office in Karachi, right? So all the information which used to be sent and received and which used to take a couple of days to be sent and received before the further processing could be done on the application of the customers and so on, and so that would be in hard copy summary, whether that is a report or a data or whatever. But now that can be easily transferred through satellite, that can be transferred through email, and that can be transferred through another number of electronic media or the electronic channels that can be used to transfer that information within seconds or within minutes, right? While previously that source was not available, and it used to be very costly, especially in terms of time, to transmit that information. Then electric typewriter instead of word processor, right? Of course, the word processor that has replaced this typewriter. Then the email system that has replaced the sticky notes, and the co-workers and assistants, they are now instead of writing, they're using this voicemail, right? You just drop a voice message, and that's it, instead of writing the messages. Moore's, basically, if you're familiar with this, Gordon Moore, who was the co-founding member of the Intel Corporation, he basically forwarded this law in 1966. And the law states that 80% of the, he basically made the 80% of the integrated processors which are used in the PCs, right? So that is what the Intel Corporation makes, right? And he's the founding member of that corporation, and you must all be familiar with Intel is a great name, right? And he basically predicted that every 18 months, the costs of computing will drop by 50% as computer processing power doubled. and the computer today is much smaller and faster than mainframes used in the 1990s, right? So you see that over a couple of decades how fast this computer technology it has developed, right? This is really a remarkable growth of the IT industry and the computer industry in this sector, right? Wherein now you see that the computers, they're much faster, they're much smaller than they used to be decades ago, right? And you can even in the 1990s, now the mini laptops and the notebooks that you're holding in your laps and in your hands, they are much faster, they are much smaller in size, and they are much more portable. Then the rate at which this technology has progressed, it has been stated that if the technology had progressed at the similar rate at which the IT technology has progressed, if it has progressed at the similar rate in the car manufacturing industry, then the cars would be much cheaper too, right? Like the cars which are being produced by the GM or by the other companies that are really expensive, they would also have been much cheaper if their improvement in the technology had been at the same pace in that industry as well. Then we see that why it is important to have the information. We see that one, we have the raw data, right? And when we process this raw data in an informative way, then it becomes information. So if I give you an example that you have data of $5, $18, $39, 49 and 21, this is just a raw data, and what can you interpret out of this? What can you analyze out of this? What can you utilize out of this if you are given this data? Right? So it is not useful for you because it is not information. So it will become information only when it will be useful for you, and it will be useful for you when you will be able to interpret something out of it, when you will be you'll be able to draw some meaningful analysis out of it. Only then it will be a useful information, right? So if instead of saying this $5, $18, 39, 49 and 21, it's just a hypothetical example. If I say that five products of a company, they are in the shape of a package, they are being offered at $18, and 39 customers are attracted towards it, and out of which 49 customers are attracted, out of which 39 are males and 21 are females. Or if I say that 39 customers are attracted, out of which 49 customers are attracted, out of which 39 are males, and 21 of these males, they are living in the urban sector. So this is just a hypothetical example that I am trying to explain to you, that how this data, it can turn into information, how from this information we can take out meaningful extracts. Like we can say that, okay, out of 49, 39 are now men, right? So it means that this kind of package is more important for men, right? So that five products are available for $18, so this package is more attractive for the men than for the women, right? And this is more attractive for the urban areas than for the rural areas, and so on, right? So we can extract a number of information, a number of analysis can be done from this kind of information that we have, and then that is how this information can become useful for us. So of course information is useful only when it can influence someone's choice and behavior, right? So if we have certain kind of information, and on the basis of that information we have to make certain decision, or we can make certain decision only when we have certain kind of information available, right? Or the quality of the information, or the more the information is, the better the quality of our decision, of course, then that information is useful, right? So if we have an information but it does not have a lot of influence on our decision making, right, so that is not as much useful information. But if on certain information is really critical to our decision making, then that information is really useful, right? So when it influences our choices, when it influences our behavior, our decisions, then it is a useful information. right? So managerial decision making is of course based on the information, right? So now what kind of information do you have? How the information is useful? What kind of information do managers need to for it to be useful, right? Or for there are a number of characteristics that make the information useful. So the first one of the characteristic is the accuracy of the information. So herein we say that information must be accurate to be useful, right? So for example, if the information is accurate, then it should be reliable and valid. So if the information is not reliable and if the information is not valid, then that information is not accurate, right? So if somebody comes to me and says me in the university, right, I am for example running a program in the university, like the graduate program. So if somebody comes to me and says to me that this year the admissions, they are not going to be very good at the university because many students, they are many prospective students, they're going to the other universities for their admissions, and there is not much likelihood that they are coming to our university. So if I get this information, how reliable that information is, that depends upon the source of the information, upon how that person, what are the basis for having that information, how valid that information is, whether he has got some really statistical evidence for this information, whether he has got the data from the admissions office, or that how many prospectus are sold, right, and how many prospectus were sold the last year, how many prospectuses are sold this year, is the ratio not good this year compared to the ratio of the prospectuses sold earlier, right? And what is the date of closing, how many have applied, how many have not applied. So if the person he's saying this to me without backing his information with strong arguments or with logic or with analysis, that information is not useful, because I will doubt the validity and reliability of that information. So the information, it needs to be valid and reliable for it to be accurate. If it is not reliable and valid, then we will doubt the accuracy of that information, and that information which is not accurate, that will not be useful information. Usefulness of the information and accuracy of the information, it is especially critical for the airline industry, because in airlines we know that almost 20% of the costs, they represent the maintenance cost. So they have heavy expenses on the maintenance of the crews and the airline system and the running of the airlines, right? So the 20% of the cost, they go on account of this maintenance cost. So if take the example of Boeing's 747 passenger jet, wherein if a person, he would just take off the switch of the circuit breaker, then the system of the Boeing 747 passenger jets, that would start showing that the plane is out of order, although just placing the switch back again would restore the circuit breaker and the system would start functioning again. So but if that is mal-reported or that is misreported to the maintenance crew that the plane is out of order, then you see that how what would be the reaction of the crew, how they would be there are a number of consequences for of this kind of information that has been wrongly provided by the system, by the information system of the Boeing 747 passenger jet, and how it has consequences of not flying the plane, of the maintenance crew spending on the maintenance and trying to sort out the problems and so on, right? Although the problem is just very small, right, that the circuit breaker switch that needs to be put back. So inaccurate information that can actually lead to a number of expensive mistakes, right? So you trying to make the corrections which are not actually required, right? You're trying to sort out the problems, so time, money, and a number of other consequences. So maybe you end up in giving a solution to a problem that does not actually exist. So then the completeness of the information is of course important. It should be complete. So if you have incomplete information, you can imagine that you cannot make a good decision. So for rational decision making, which we assume, you need to have complete information. If you don't have the complete information, it means that you don't have the complete picture, right? And without having a complete picture, you cannot make a very good decision, right? So you need to identify problems and identify potential solutions So the new generation planes like Boeing 777 contains 600 computer sensors that airline can use to schedule the maintenance, right? So with the help of these 600 computer sensors, they get the complete information, and with the help of that, they can schedule their maintenance in order to get the complete information. Because again, as I told you, that without complete information, your decisions that might be faulty. Right, and because if you have incomplete information and you're basing your decisions on that incomplete information, that might be different than if you have another piece of information and that is so relevant and important for you that it altogether changes your decision, right? So if that part of information is missing and that is not complete, then your decision would be different, and that might not be a very good decision, right? Then the information, it needs to be relevant, and information is useful when relevant, and relevant pertains to when it pertains to the problem, right? So any information which does not pertain to the problem, that is not relevant to you, and that is not helpful for you, that is not useful for you in making your decisions. The Federal Aviation Administration, it classifies these maintenance problems on planes into 3 categories. One, they say that their priority 1 problems are those problems that must be fixed after the plane lands or before it is allowed to take off. Right, so the plane is not allowed to take off before these priority 1 problems are fixed. The priority 2 problems are those problems which are not of as huge importance or intensity, and the plane is allowed to operate for a limited time period before those problems can be fixed. So we have a time duration within which we can fix that problem, right? And the plane is allowed to operate within that time period. And the priority 3 problems are the ones which are minor and that the airline can fix at its own discretion, right? So there is no time frame for those problems, but it's upon the discretion of the airline that how and when it wants to fix those problems. Then of course the information, it needs to be timely. You must have heard several times echoing it to yourself that I wish I had known that ahead of time. So several times we say this to ourselves that if I had known this before time, I would have done this, or I would have made this decision or made that decision. So this is timely information. That what is the importance of timely information? If you're familiar with this statement, you would also be familiar with the importance of the timely information. So the information available nowadays to plane maintenance crew is more accurate, reliable and timely. You must be familiar with this United Airlines new MS, which allows the crew to track plane performance while they are en route to their destinations. So during their routes to their destinations, this MS of the United Airlines, it has enabled the maintenance crew to track the performance of the plane, and if there are any smaller or some problems that can be fixed during the route, they can also be fixed therein, right? So because otherwise that can be really disastrous, especially in the case of the airlines, right? They don't have any margin of error. The system needs to be really accurate, and really the timely decisions need to be made, and the timely information needs to be gathered, right? So this is the quality of the information system. Then there are a number of costs which are attached to acquisition of this information or of the cost of this useful information. The first one is the acquisition costs. Then the cost that we have to spend when we have to gather that information, when we have to collect that information, right? So that is the acquisition cost, right? So for example, if you have to conduct a research and you have to through a survey system or through a survey method, and you float the questionnaires, you have to get the questionnaires filled from the 10 or 20 banks. You have to go to the employees of those banks, and the costs, you can imagine yourself that the cost that you are incurring on acquiring that information. First, you need to make a questionnaire, right? So you need to have a software to make that questionnaire. You need to have a computer to make that questionnaire. There will be some cost that will be attached to that. Then you printing of the questionnaire, that will need some cost. The photocopying of the questionnaire, that will need some cost. Then the traveling cost that will be attached to get that information so these are all a number of costs that are attached to getting that information. Then you get the questionnaires fulfilled and you have all the information, but there is some acquisition cost that is attached to that information, right? Similarly, the CAB reports, that are basically the consumer investigation. They are basically reports that are being given, generated by the State Bank of Pakistan, and all the different banks and the other consumer credit companies. They take this report, they acquire this report from the State Bank of Pakistan before they have to process any loan application. So this report basically contains all the data on the history of the consumer, right? That what is the credit history of the consumer, whether he has been in bad debts or he has been in bad loans, or his loan has been in overdue, he has not given his returns on time period. So this kind of information is contained in that report. Then we have the processing costs that are attached to the to this information that you have acquired. Once you have acquired the information, you of course need to process that information. So the questionnaire, the information that has been gathered through that questionnaire, that really needs to put somewhere in whether that will be processed manually, or that will be entered in the computer, and there that will be processed, right? That how that will be arranged, how that will be brought into the format that is compatible, right? And so a number of issues that are related to the processing of this information, that of course it requires the certain costs that are associated with it. So like the Reader's Digest, it has its you see that it has its readership worldwide, so from a number of countries. I think from 39-40 countries there are people who are member of this Reader's Digest, who are reading this. So you see that how huge would be the system that would be required by this Reader's Digest to keep a track and to keep a record of its readers, right? So from all over the globe, when it has readers, of what are the age groups of those readers, right? And from which region they particularly are, whether they are males or females, etc. A number of information on their demographics and a number of information on their profiles, etc. Then might need to be maintained by this Reader's Digest. And just imagine that gathering such a huge amount of data from a number of countries around the globe, what processing cost it requires. Might be requiring a number of mainframes to keep that information and to process that information. So right, so you can imagine the processing cost. Then of course the storage cost, that if we take the example of this Reader's Digest, how you have to store that information, right? And if it is being done electronically, which is, it may not be of course possible to store all this information physically. If you have to store that electronically, then the systems that you need to store that information, right, whether it has to be stored in the magnetic tapes, or it has to be stored in the DVDs and the CDs, what format they have to be stored in the computer, with the hard drives and the external hard drive, etc. And the storage sources that we'll be discussing in our following presentation, right? But here we see that whatever is the mode of the storage of that information, whether that is manual or that is electronic, there's certain storage cost involved. So it is a cost of a software, or it's the cost of the systems, or it is the cost of physically placing the physical location of the information, where you are going to place that information physically, whether it is going to be in the stores or wherever, right? So that is the cost that is involved in storing that information. So following information available with SBP data base, such as age, estimated income, home ownership, cars ownership, occupation, children, number of credit cards, and so on. So all this kind of information, this is just the example from the CIB report that we discussed in our previous slide, that how this is SBP, that in this report it gives all this information, and you need to process all this information, and then you need to store all this information. So you need to have a strong MIS and a number of computers that are required to store all this information, in case you are electronically storing the information. And if you are physically storing the information, I told you that how it involves the cost of the warehouse, or the cost of the store wherein you have to keep that information. Then of course there are certain retrieval costs that are attached. If you know that somebody has some information that is required by you, right, you first have to convince that somebody to share that information with you, and if that somebody is convinced that okay, he or she can share that information with you, then you have to get that information, processed, and you have to turn it into a format which is usable for you. And by the time all this gets done, then that information may no longer be timely, and then that may not remain useful for you. So it's not that the retrieval costs are minimum or that there are no retrieval costs, but there can be sometimes very heavy retrieval costs. So sometimes you know that somebody has the information, and sometimes that person is not willing to give that information to you, or that information retrieval, it may not remain possible anymore. In certain situations, circumstances can also arise wherein the retrieval may not remain possible. Then we have this communication costs that are attached to this information. Which are of course the transmission of the information costs from one place to another. Like the electric companies, they have employed these meter readers who walk from house to house and they gather the information, and then that would be entered into the company computers, right? So these are the communication costs. Then what is the strategic importance of information? Of course, you can reap this strategic competitive advantage by reaping the first mover advantage, and but of course you need to have so you need to sustain the competitive advantage that you reach at. We discussed the concept of competitive advantage and how and when the companies can sustain this competitive advantage. We saw that we also saw that how the first movers, they can be really advantageous in terms of the market share that they gain and the profits that they reach. So let's see that the first mover advantage is basically the strategic advantage that companies earn by being the first to use new information technology to lower costs or to differentiate a product. So the companies who basically enter the market with new innovation, with a new product, with new information technology, right, so they are basically the first movers, and it has been reported that these first movers, they earn 30% more market share and profits compared to the 90% market share and profits that is earned by the followers. So there is a remarkable difference of around 11% between the first movers and the followers, right? And then we also have the example of this the early adopters of the ATM machines. So the ones who switched to this, the banks who shift to this ATM machines, wherein you can without visiting a bank, you can just get your cash, and you can withdraw the cash, and you can deposit the money, and it provides 24 hours a day, right? And so the firms, a study shows that who are the early adopters of this ATM technology, they were basically 26%, they had this market share compared to the followers, right? So we also have the example of Amazon.com, which is the first online store, and it sells the books online. It is around a repository of around 2.5 million books, which is 10 times more that of Barnes and Nobles, right? And this company, Amazon.com, an online bookstore, unique of its kind, it has basically gained this first mover advantage by reducing its costs. And how it does that is that, one, it avoids the physical store, the physical storage is not required, like that in case of the Barnes and Nobles, with the need a physical location, a store, and they have to pay costs of that store in the physical location. And of course, when you are physically providing the books, it needs a lot more space than when those books are available online. You do not need that physical space. You don't need that. You don't have those storage costs. You don't need to have that storage capacity, right? So that is why the Amazon.com is offering around 2.5 million books, and it only orders the new books when its earlier book is sold, right? So this is how they have also reduced the cost of the inventory. So they don't have to maintain the inventory at the same rate, or they don't have to put in that much money in the inventory as the Barnes and Nobles is doing, which has a huge cost of inventory that it has to maintain. Right, so these are the types of the costs that the Amazon.com is saving, and as a result, it is earning much more profits. So these are some of the advantages of being a first mover, right? But this is important to note here that of course the first movers, they are reported to earn higher profits, but sometimes some organizations, when they enter into the market, they also have this follower strategy, right? So what they do is that they just follow the or they have this imitation strategy in which they after the first mover has entered the market and the market share of the first mover increases in the beginning, and then when the technology becomes older, obsolete, then when the followers, they basically what they do is that when the first mover has launched the product in the market, they learn the first mover from the first mover, the technology that has been used, and they imitate that technology, and then they enter into the market with much cheaper technology and at a lower price, and as a result they capture greater market share. So in some instances that also happens when the firms, they have this counter strategy prepared, that how they will imitate and they will come into the market and they will outplay the first movers. And sometimes it becomes so difficult and tough for the first movers to combat this competitive strategy of the imitating firms, and as a result they have to in some cases they also knock out of business, because they cannot come up with this they cannot play up with this approach or with this strategy of the imitators. So the firms, they really need to be careful. The first movers also, they need to be careful that how they are getting the competitive advantage from a particular IT technology or the strategy that they're following, and if they're getting that competitive advantage, is that sustainable or not? So they are the important questions they need to be they need to concern themselves. So smaller banks, like what they did was that as a result of the ATM that was being adopted by the larger banks, what they did was that they formed this ATM networks like Plus and Cyrus, and the transaction costs which can be processed on almost all the banks through this network. And as we discussed, that since the new information is costly, therefore the first mover strategies, they can sometimes also fail. So the resource-based view of information technology says that only when the IT creates value for the firm by lowering the costs of providing better quality or service, only then it can be a competitive advantage, that information technology. But if it does not improve the quality, that information technology, or it does not reduce the price, then of course it does not have any added value in the eyes of the customer, and thus it does not provide any competitive advantage. And then if the technology, similar technology, is also being used by the competitors, then of course you don't have any edge over the competitor in the use of the technology, and therefore there might be a competitive parity, right? And as a result, the competitive advantage may not be attained and may not be sustained, right? So but if your technology is better over the technology of the competitors, or you have edge in your technology, then is it difficult for others to create or buy it? And if it is difficult for others to create such technology or to buy that technology, then of course your competitive advantage that might be there, but that might be a temporary competitive advantage, right? But if that is not possible, it's not possible to bring substitute products to imitate that technology. If it is not possible, then you might get competitive advantage which might be sustainable, right? So here is the representation of what we discussed in the form of this, wherein we see that does the information technology create value, and if it does create value, then it can be a source of competitive advantage. If it does not create value, then of course it is not. Then is the IT different across competing firms? If it is different across competing firms, then it can be a source of competitive advantage, but otherwise not. Then is it difficult for another firm to create or buy the IT? If it is possible for other firms, then of course it won't be a competitive advantage, but if it is not, then it might be a sustainable competitive advantage. Then the capturing information, we have two methods available. One is the manual and one is the electronic. When you have some information, like you're going to a bank and you're fulfilling an application form to open the account, so that is a manual source of information. You are manually filling the application form, and that form is then processed and put in into the system. All that information manually, the information that is put into the system by the accounts officer or account opening officer, right? So of course that system is prone to a number of inaccuracies and faults or human errors that can be there, and those errors and the faults that can be avoided if you use this electronic system, because that is much faster, that is not that expensive, that does not require all that files and everything to be stored that way, right? And that is more accurate, the electronic information, right? So the number of examples such as the barcodes, the radio frequency identification tags, the electronic scanners, and the optical character recognition, they're all the examples of this capturing information electronically, right? So the electronic scanners, we know we often use them, such as we have this the printed text, we have the pictures, or we have other images that we scan, and as a result they are available to us in the form of the digitalized image, and we can use them, and we can also edit those by way of this optical character recognition, which is a software to edit, read and process the text. Then we have the barcodes as well, which is a visual pattern that represents numerical data by varying thickness and pattern of vertical bars. So these barcodes, we are familiar that they are now commonly used in the grocery stores, where all the products, they have been the barcodes are put in there, and when they are passed through the scanners, and with a beep, all the information on the barcodes that is captured by the system, and you don't need to put in all the information manually, like the stockers, they don't need to put price tag on every product, and as a result it saves a considerable amount of time and the mistakes that can happen during the process, and then also it reduces the checkout time, right, in the stores. So these are the most common methods of electronic data capture. Then for the storing of the information, of course, manually the paper is the most common form, and we discussed the disadvantages of storing information in the form of the paper. Then we have this microfilm, which is the small photographic slides used to store the data, and a reel of film, it can store hundreds of pages of data. It is often used in the libraries to store issues of magazines and newspapers, and it's of course inexpensive. It permits faster retrieval compared to paper and requires little storage space, and particularly good method of storing archived longly inaccessed data. But of course it can be accessed only by one person at a time, and access of information available only where microfilm is stored, not everywhere. Of course it is not accessible and not by the multiple people. Then we have these CD-ROMs, which are the compact disc read-only memory. They are the compact discs that hold up to 650 megabytes of text, sound or graphic data, and they are one of the cheapest forms of the electronic data storage. And DVDs, which are similar to those but which have a greater capacity, they're also cheaper, and they are also a worthwhile storage option for most of the companies. Then we have these data storage tapes, which are used for this archived data, and you can say that they are often used as the secondary data source, right? The hard drives, which are the most commonly used data storage device, they are basically mounted inside the computer, and they allow the user the very fastest retrieval to the data, right? And you can say that they're also cheaply available, but their downside is that they crash, they just lock up, and they can destroy the data and produce immediate work stoppages, right? So but they are the most common form of this primary data storage, and most easily accessible and fastly accessible and cheap as well, right? Then the processing information, of course, there are three kinds of the computer processing. One is the centralized processing, wherein the processing and storing data from individual computer terminals on the mainframe computers, which have gigabytes of memory and terabytes of hard drive storage spaces. So the information processing is centralized through the mainframes, like in the face of the Reader's Digest, wherein they have huge amount of information that is stored on the mainframes and processed centralized. Then this distributed processing is where you are processing and storing all the data in the desktop computers. The individual employees, they have these desktop computers, then they can fastly, and when they are, for example, an applicant comes to the to an individual for the processing of for his loan application, he has this desktop computer wherein he will process all that information and give that to, so that is fast and easy way of this processing of the information. And shared processing is basically a client and the server network, wherein the client is the desktop computer, right, and all the different desktop computers, they are linked through this server, and in server all the information is kept. So the size of the server, the memory and the capacity of the server is much bigger, 10 to 100 times bigger than that of the desktop computers, but that is of course much smaller than the mainframes. So it really depends on what type of information processing system do you use. Multiple companies, they can also use the multiple processing systems. It depends upon their requirements. Like the large companies use all the different forms, smaller companies, they use a combination of desktop and server network computers, right? So here this figure of course shows the cost and configuration for desktop server and the mainframe computers in order to make your decisions. Of course there are a number of options with which you need to protect your information, such as the firewalls, the antivirus softwares, data encryption and the virtual private networks. The password, you need to be really careful to set your passwords. There is how it should be a complex number that you're setting as your password, and these are the guidelines on how to set your password. So of course the accessing and the sharing of the information and knowledge, there is previously it would take weeks for companies to confirm the customer orders, but now we have the emails, and we all discussed that how the emails, they're the very fast form, but their downside is that a number of emails are received and some of which are totally irrelevant for the managers, so it is a lot of information for the managers. Then we have this voice messaging, which is a telephone answering system that records the voice messages, and it has more freedom of expression. Some people are not readers, they're just talkers. That is why it is it is a relatively richer source, right? But its downside is that reading messages faster than listening. Then we have this conferencing systems as well, which will allow 2 or more users in different locations to see and talk to each other as if they are in the same room. We have this document conferencing, where 2 or more people, they can view the document and they can comment on the document. In the application sharing, it is just one step further of this document conferencing, wherein 2 or more people, they can even also make the comments on the document. They can also make changes on the documents, not only make the comments. So right in there, they can make the changes in the document. Then the desktop video conferencing is basically where 2 or more people who are sitting in different locations there. So herein they're using the video cameras, and they can also hear each other. They can see that they share the documents, and this desktop video conferencing, it basically requires very high speed internet connections, right, and very smooth picture quality to work. We have this executive information systems, which is basically to the executives, it is a high quality information system which provides very easy access to the data, both the internal and the external, in a very readable form, in a very analytical form. It is available to the with one click. It is available to the managers. So the managers, they don't need to be very adept and very efficient in this computer technology and their analysis. They have all this data with one click. It appears in front of them in the form of the graphs, in the form of the figures, in the form of comparative analysis between the different regions, between the different demographic wise data, and so on, right? So it is available to them, so it is easier to use for them. So these are the characteristics of some of the best-selling executive information systems that I would like you to see. Then we have these intranets, which are the private company networks, and they allow employees to access, share, and publish the information. So here in the companies, why they use these intranets, that is because they're inexpensive, they increase efficiencies, and they reduce costs, they're intuitive and easy to use, and so on. So this was our today's lecture on sharing and the managing of the information. We made a comparison between the information channels in the past and now, how those channels can become useful, and what are the challenges of the data retrieval, communication, storing, and of information, and what is the executive information system, and what are the different processing sources. I hope you enjoyed today's lecture. I wish you all the best. Thank you very much.